When it comes to the Beatles, their discography is filled with groundbreaking music, but three albums in particular are often ranked at the very top for their innovation, influence, and lasting impact on both fans and musicians alike. These albums are Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and Abbey Road. Each one marked a major turning point, not only in the Beatles' career, but in the history of music itself. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for daily history and culture content. First, let's start off with Revolver, released in 1966. This was the Beatles' seventh studio album, and it represented a dramatic shift away from their earlier, more straightforward pop and rock style into more experimental, artistic territory. The opening track, Taxman, immediately set the tone with a politically charged message and gritty guitar riff. It was written by George Harrison, who had been growing as a songwriter and wanted to express his frustration with the high taxes imposed on wealthy earners in the UK. From there, the album dives into a wide variety of themes and sounds. Eleanor Rigby, with its haunting string arrangement and tale of loneliness, showed how the Beatles could tell deep, emotional stories without relying on traditional rock instrumentation. Then there's I'm Only Sleeping, which plays with backward guitar effects and dreamy, surreal lyrics to capture the feeling of floating between sleep and wakefulness. Love You Too, another Harrison song, brought in traditional Indian instruments like the sitar and tabla, showcasing his growing interest in Indian music and culture. Paul McCartney's For No One and Here, There, and Everywhere revealed a new level of maturity in his songwriting, focusing on introspective themes of love, loss, and reflection. But It's Tomorrow Never Knows that really defined Revolver's experimental spirit. With its looping tape effects, manipulated vocals, and spiritual lyrics drawn from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the song sounded like nothing else at the time. It was a bold, psychedelic statement that opened the door for countless artists to experiment with sound and structure in their music. Revolver wasn't just a great collection of songs, it was a complete rethinking of what an album could be. It helped to push rock music into more artistic territory and inspired future genres like psychedelic rock, progressive rock, and even electronic music. It proved the Beatles weren't just pop stars, they were true innovators. Moving ahead one year, we get to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, released in 1967. Widely considered one of the most important albums of all time, Sgt. Pepper was a massive creative leap that redefined popular music. The Beatles adopted alter egos for this record, presenting themselves as the fictional Sgt. Pepper's Band, which gave them the freedom to break from their past and explore new ideas without being tied to their public personas. The title track and its reprise, bookend the album, give it a loose concept feel, while tracks like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite took listeners on a wild, colorful journey through surreal landscapes and circus imagery. A Day in the Life, the album's closing song, is a masterpiece that blends John Lennon's dreamy, fragmented storytelling with Paul McCartney's energetic everyday narrative, culminating in a massive orchestral crescendo that feels like the end of the world and the beginning of something new. The album was one of the first to be conceived as a complete listening experience, with the songs flowing into one another and tied together with sound effects, thematic links, and consistent sonic experimentation. They used new studio techniques like Verispeed, tape loops, and automatic double tracking to create unique textures. George Martin, the Beatles' producer, played a huge role in crafting this sonic world, treating the studio itself as an instrument. Sgt. Pepper also featured one of the most iconic album covers of all time, with the Beatles surrounded by a collage of famous figures from history and pop culture. The cover alone became a symbol of 1960s counterculture. The album received widespread critical acclaim and won 4 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year, the first rock album to do so. It wasn't just an artistic achievement, it was a cultural event that changed how people thought about albums, musicianship, and artistic ambition. Sgt. Pepper helped to elevate rock music to the status of serious art and influence artists like Pink Floyd to David Bowie to Radiohead. It captured the spirit of the 1960s and pushed the boundaries of what music could express. Finally, we come to Abbey Road, released in 1969. It was the last album the Beatles recorded together, even though Let It Be was released later. Despite tensions within the band at the time, Abbey Road is one of their most polished and cohesive works. The album opens with Come Together, a swampy, bluesy track featuring cryptic lyrics in a groovy rhythm that became one of Lennon's signature songs. Then there's Something, George Harrison's standout love ballad, which even Frank Sinatra once called the greatest love song ever written. Harrison had truly come into his own as a songwriter by this point, and Abbey Road gave him the platform to shine. Octopus's Garden, sung by Ringo Starr, added a light-hearted, whimsical touch, while tracks like Oh Darling and I Want You, She's So Heavy showed the band exploring raw emotion and intense musical moods. The second half of Abbey Road is perhaps its most famous feature, the medley. Beginning with You Never Give Me Your Money and running through songs like Sun King, Mean Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pam, and She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, it culminates in Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight, and The End. This medley is a brilliant example of how the Beatles could take small musical fragments and weave them into seamless, emotionally powerful suit. It was a farewell to their fans and to each other, full of harmony, unity, and musical mastery. Even the hidden track, Her Majesty, which comes after a brief silence, adds a touch of humor and surprise, reminding listeners that the Beatles never lost their playful side. Abbey Road's production quality is also remarkable. It was one of the first albums to feature the Moog synthesizer, and the use of stereo sound was more advanced than in their previous work. The band pushed the limits of studio technology once again, creating an album that sounded fresh and futuristic. The famous album cover, showing the four Beatles walking across a zebra crossing outside Abbey Road Studios, became one of the most recognized images in music history and sparked countless parodies and conspiracy theories, including the famous Paul is dead rumor. Abbey Road was a triumph that proved, even in their final moments as a group, the Beatles could still work together to create something truly magical. It showed maturity, craftsmanship, and a sense of closure that gave their fans one last perfect chapter. Taken together, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and Abbey Road represent the peak of the Beatles' creativity and influence. Revolver was bold and innovative, marking the beginning of their experimental era. Sgt. Pepper took that experimentation even further, turning the album into a cohesive art form. Abbey Road, meanwhile, brought all their experience and talent together into a final masterpiece. Each of these albums pushed the boundaries of what popular music could be. They experimented with new recording techniques, incorporated different genres, and wrote lyrics that tackled everything from love and loneliness to spirituality and surrealism. More importantly, these albums continue to influence musicians today, whether it's the layered production of Revolver, the ambitious concept of Sgt. Pepper, or the melodic perfection of Abbey Road. The Beatles set a standard that artists still try to reach. These albums weren't just products of their time. They helped shape the times and left a legacy that continues to grow. The Beatles weren't just a band, they were a revolution, and these 3 albums are the best proof of why their music still matters. Like, comment, and subscribe for daily history and culture content.